attention. Welcome to the second Rutland Agricultural Society Zoom talk. Great to see so many numbers here. We've got just in 40 now, so that's great. Just a couple of housekeeping points. I will be muting you, so there's no distraction or background noises for the speaker. And it is helpful if you do turn off your cameras, so then you don't get the little icons all around the slideshow. So we will be taking a limited number of questions afterwards, after the talk. So just use the chat facility for those, and I'll feed those into the speaker immediately after his talk. So this week's talk is given by Allan Grey, as you've probably guessed already, and it's entitled Much Happiness is Bhutan, and certainly you'd have seen that. I'd just like to say that it's not an agricultural talk, but it is a fascinating journey through one of the least visited countries of the world. Well, what further comment could I make? Just enjoy the occasion. And over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Agricultural Society members, camp followers and friends both from the UK and the US, and I believe perhaps even friends of friends from the Netherlands. Welcome to this happy talk about Bhutan. Thank you for finding time in your undoubtedly busy social distancing diary. This should take just between 35 and 40 minutes with time for a few questions at the end. That is, of course, if you find out how to use the chat facility. Also hoping that the whole affair is being recorded, as I've had a couple of requests for people who couldn't make it tonight. And lastly, but by no means least, thank you so much to Robert and Emma for setting this talk up as part of the wide-ranging Rutland Agricultural Society educational programme. Now, a bit like Robert did last week, a quick bio about me. My name is Allan Grey, 42 years living in Rutland, 25 years working at Pedigree, 11 years in Rutland Lions, and 7 years involved with the Rutland County Show, and invited last year to become a trustee of the society. I know little or nothing about agriculture and am barely green-fingered, but I have, however, travelled extensively over the last 20 years, and this talk is about one such adventure undertaken back in 2016 to the unique country of Bhutan. Now, Robert has urged me to make some mention of agriculture and livestock, which I've tried very hard to do. But you will need to stay awake, as the mentions may be little more than subliminal. Now, as legend has it, Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche to his friends, landed at Paro, Taksang, to meditate when he brought Buddhism to Bhutan in the 7th century. He is said to have arrived on a flying tiger, which had recently been his Tibetan concubine. He then meditated in a cave high on a mountain, after which he subdued the local demons and began the conversion of the Bhutanese to Buddhism. The Tigers Nest Monastery was built in 1692 by someone named Tenzin Rabgai, who could have been the reincarnation of Guru Rinpoche, or maybe someone entirely different. Very hard to be definitive. Now, this chap here is in the audience tonight, and here my friend Lee is contemplating the Tigers Nest Trail. Unfortunately, for those without flying tiger concubines, getting to the Tigers Nest is a little more difficult. We choose to do this before our trek for real starts, something of a warm-up. The climb from the valley floor at 7,000 feet above sea level to the Tigers Nest, 3,000 feet above, takes us just around 3 hours. As we climb the very steep but well-maintained trail over ever more vertical switchbacks, the monastery seems to appear and disappear in and out of the trees and the mists. After 2 hours or so, we arrive at the beginning of the entrance to the Tiger's Nest, a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast chasm with a monastery on the other side. We marvel at the precarious location and wonder just how it was built here over 300 years ago. Nearly 1,000 or so steps to navigate, half down past a large cascading waterfall, and then half up again to reach our destination, the fabulous Tigers Nest. Bhutanese visitors are only allowed inside in national costume, but we can enter, having first taken off shoes and left cameras and mobile phones behind in safekeeping. So sadly, I have no images of the interior. The monastery is built around the cave where Padmasambhava meditated for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, and 3 hours, so we're led to believe. He clearly had a fixation on the number 3. And ever since the monastery was built, it has been a place of pilgrimage for many Tibetan monks, where they come regularly to pray and meditate. The smell of incense fills the air, and you can hear occasional chants from monks nearby. Each of the rooms is ornate and decorated with fabulous images of Buddhist deities, and there are many offerings of money and fresh food. The spirituality of the monastery is omnipresent, and we leave with just our memories of one of the most iconic places imaginable, and the prospect of a 2-hour return hike back down the hill. Having trekked a number of times previously in the Nepalese Himalayas, Bhutan had been on my radar for some time, and by 2016 it had risen to pole position. Bhutan is a remote Himalayan kingdom sandwiched between India and China, and known internationally for measuring its progress not by GDP, but by GNH, or gross national happiness, more of which later. This is the final image of the Tiger's Nest. You just can't get too much of a good thing. Most folk will have heard of Bhutan, but not many will know anything about the country, the land of the thunder dragon. Having heard of the place, I knew that the Tigers Nest Monastery was the jewel in Bhutan's crown and a must visit during our trip. Bhutan is an independent sovereign nation sandwiched between India to the south and separated from Tibet to the north by the eastern end of the Himalayas. It's roughly the size of Switzerland, but with a population of only 700,000 people. Nepal to the west is similar sized, similarly located, but with a population approaching 3 million. Since 1907, Bhutan has been ruled by the House of Wangchuk, and successive kings, or dragon kings, have overseen massive changes to the country. Historically, Bhutan is one of the only few countries independent throughout their history, never conquered, never occupied or governed by an outside power. Following some minor skirmishes in the 18th and 19th centuries with the British, who else, an accommodation was reached that allowed Bhutan to manage their internal affairs, but take guidance regarding their external affairs, first from the British and post-independence in 1947 from India. From 1947, Bhutan has maintained good political and commercial arrangements with India, preferring this to a relationship with China, closing its border with Tibet after the Chinese takeover in 1951. Tourism in Bhutan began in 1974, when, in an effort to raise revenue and to promote the country's unique culture to the outside world, the government opened this isolated country to foreign tourists. Despite being open to foreigners, the government has been acutely aware of the environmental impact that tourists could have on Bhutan's unique and virtually unspoiled landscape. And therefore they decided to restrict the level of tourist activity from the start, preferring higher quality tourism. Put simply, this means that if you wish to travel to Bhutan, currently your trip needs to cost a minimum of $250 a day. This, of course, ensures very few backpackers, but many aging Western tourists such as myself. Bhutan is also well known for its international airport at Paro, sitting at 7,000 feet above sea level and nestling among the Himalayan giants. It is one of the most challenging, so I'm having a bit of trouble with my iPad, one of the most challenging anywhere in the world for pilots to take off and land. At last count, only about 20 pilots were qualified to fly in and out of Paro, and they all work for Druk Air, the national airline. Unfortunately, a number of them are on duty the day we fly in from Kathmandu. There can be few more spectacular flights anywhere in the world than the 250 miles between Kathmandu and Paro. We ensure we get seats on the port side of our turboprop Druk Air flight and are treated to a Himalayan panorama like no other. Along the way, Mount Everest, Makalu, Kanchenjunga, all 8,000 metre peaks heading to the eastern end of the Himalayas. Despite the perilous flight path, the views over the clear blue waters of the Paro River and the lush green foliage of the Himalayas are sensational. We catch our first sight of the unique Bhutanese architecture as we commence our landing in Paro. And then one of the most attractive airports you'll travel to, and we're definitely somewhere different. Have you ever seen a baggage reclaim like this one? Certainly not at Gatwick or Heathrow, that's for sure. A trip down to the Adventure Travel Show at Olympia earlier in the year found a travel company with over 30 years experience in Bhutan, Mountain Kingdoms. They provided a few itineraries and we opted for the Jomolhari trek, a total of 10 days hiking, taking in Jomolhari Base Camp at just over 4,000 metres, which will be followed by a week of touring after the trek, including Thimpu, the current capital, and Punakha, the historic capital. The hike up to the Tigers Nest is part of the couple of days we spend in and around Paro, and amongst other things we visit the superb fort and museum in Paro overlooking the Paro Valley before making the way to the start of our trek. It's during this time that we, with our guide, Rikdeen Shering Wangchuk, or Kensho for short, that we start to learn a little bit about the history and culture of Bhutan. And here's my trekking buddy Lee. He's the one on the left, and the gentleman on the right is Kensho. And along with virtually all Bhutanese citizens, wears national costume on a daily basis. Bhutanese citizens are required to do this in all government premises, schools, monasteries, and when guiding foreign nationals such as ourselves. Bhutan's process of modernisation was initiated by Jigme Dorji Wangchuk, the third Dragon King, with the move from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. This was later overseen by Jigme Singai Wangchuk, the fourth Dragon King, and implemented fully as recently as 2006. On his abdication, he was succeeded by the current king, Jigme Khesar Wangchuk, the fifth Dragon King. But since 1971, the country has rejected GDP as the only way to measure progress. In its place, it has championed a new approach to development, which measures prosperity through formal principles of gross national happiness, focusing on the spiritual, physical, social, and environmental health of its citizens and natural environment. It was the fourth Dragon King who believed an economic approach dehumanized the development process and decided instead to focus on a concept that he called gross national happiness. In Bhutan, happiness was to be pursued by limiting access to foreign culture, and the success of the country would be measured by its citizens' happiness around four primary pillars, namely sustainable and equitable socio-economic development, conservation of the environment, preservation and promotion of Bhutanese culture, and lastly, good governance. And for the past 3 decades, this belief that well-being should take preference over material growth has remained a global oddity. Now, in a world beset by collapsing financial systems, gross inequality and wide-scale environmental destruction, this tiny Buddhist state's approach has attracted a lot of interest. The concept of gross national happiness as a development philosophy has evolved into a national conscience and is a bridge between the fundamental values of kindness, equality, and humanity, and the necessary pursuit of economic growth, such that it helps the nation in making better and wiser decisions for the well-being and happiness of all Bhutanese. The current king puts it quite simply: in Bhutan, we believe in development, but with values. And here's King Jigme Khesar Wangchuk welcoming me to his happy country. although I'm not sure the Queen is quite so enamoured. Educated in England at Oxford University, the King is no longer an absolute monarch, but is still revered, and during our trip is hiking up country, visiting remote villages in the region that we're about to visit. The King's passionate duty of care for his people is demonstrated during his road trips, stopping to help students, the elderly, and people needing medical care through a scheme known as Kidoo, which also includes giving state land to landless farmers. Now, I'm never quite sure whether I'm a traveller or just a tourist. The former seems to have more kudos than the latter. However, I suspect I'm just a tourist. Whichever, what we all crave is authenticity. To get somewhere where others haven't been or perhaps haven't arrived yet, and we are fortunate to experience just such an occasion. I certainly didn't know that the national sport of Bhutan was archery, but we find this out on our way to the start of our trek. Kensho spies a field as we drive along where an archery competition is in progress. He guesses 2 village teams competing against one another. Fairly small targets are located at each end of the field, some 150 metres apart, and the archers are loosing their arrows the full length of the field. We wait for a break and quickly cross the field and find some seating. This is a serious sport. In fact, it's considered a martial art in Bhutan, and as expected, all the competitors are in national costume, with some taking their lives in their hands. The bows the archers use are sophisticated modern compound bows. And a bit like bowls, the skip, shown here, taking his life into his hands, is directing operations very close to the target, giving instruction to his archers 150 metres distance. When an arrow finds the target, especially the bull, there's much whooping, high-fiving and dancing, and emotions can run high during competitions, and support for archers and ridicule or distraction of opponents can become violent. Fortunately, the competition we watch doesn't get violent, but it certainly gets animated. The day is sunny and warm, and we spend a couple of hours watching not only the archery, but an accompanying dance group of immaculately clad Bhutanese ladies. We are the only visitors present, and we are enchanted by the whole experience. Now, I'm going to issue an agriculture alert here. This is a bit of agriculture coming up. We continue our journey to the start of the trek. It's a beautiful day, and we stop for lunch in the valley. And spread out before us is a quite bucolic scene. We could almost be in rural England at harvest time. But it's Bhutan, and the harvest here is red rice, the staple food of the Bhutanese. When milled, some of the red husk remains, and when cooked, it retains a pale pink hue. Agriculture is an important part of the Bhutanese economy, amounting to about 35% of GDP. Most farms are small, and there is no use of chemicals, making Bhutan unique in being the only country to have 100% of their farming in organic production. Farming operations are very labour intensive, with many women working in the fields. In fact, there's virtually no work for women outside of agriculture in the countryside.
That was taken 25 years later. She takes another girl. That sounded to be random, is it?
To catch up and stream drama shows for free, just search UK TV Play.
I can't stop praying. It's about so much more.
And they sing in the fields as well.
I don't know where that was coming from.
No,
no idea.
I think it was the ladies here, they were singing. It helps them while they're working. Rice and maize are the 2 major crops. Each are around 40 to 45% of the arable area. So other crops such as wheat and vegetables take up a very small area by comparison. And crops are typically grown in the valley bottoms or in classical terracing. It certainly looks like hard work. And this is where it ends up, having been scythed and collected. This is the threshing machine. I guess that would be in the Rutland County Museum now, in all probability. Our first night is spent mostly sleepless, as between 20 to 30 wild dogs bark constantly throughout the night. Things look up a little when our marvellous cook magics up a feast of a breakfast. Wangchuk dorji. It seems everyone in Bhutan is actually called Wangchuk or dorji, or probably or both. Anyway, he is a consummate master in the kitchen and keeps us superbly well fed throughout our trek. Amusingly, Wangchuk dorji is just 40 years old, so from here on he became known as WD-40. All our equipment, Thank you, Lee. Could see you laughing, mate.
On me.
All our equipment, tents, kitchen utensils, food, kit bags will be carried by these guys. And they look like they've done it all before, ready to go before we are. The entrance to Jigme Dorji Wangchuk National Park, and it's all uphill from here. And no, happily, we don't encounter any real snow leopards. Our first full day trekking consists of around 8 hours of maybe hopping the large boulders that line the river, gaining altitude to around 3,000 meters and stopping for the night at the Thimpu campsite. Ably led by Red Leader, these guys know the way. They've been here before. The route is heavily forested, and as we're nearing the end of the season, the leaves are turning, producing a vivid range of colours from light yellow through to deep purple, reminding me of Scotland or maybe New England in the fall. The river, or correctly the Paro Chew, is ever present. Some shots of our spectacular trekking environment and our constant companion, the glacial torrent of the Paro Chew. Our stop for the night at Thimpu, and we get our first real sight of Jomulhari, just the peak of this 23,000-foot giant glowing by the light of the moon. Should apologise actually, because I mixed my feet and my meters up in this, but I know you're all good at conversions. The following day, we continue up the valley and begin to recognise that Bhutan is not immune to the environmental issues that are present in any developed or developing country. But conservation of the natural environment remains of paramount importance and a government priority. By decree, 60% of the country's landmass must remain covered with indigenous forest in perpetuity. And in keeping with their Buddhist culture, it is illegal to kill or trap any wild animals. One significant feature of our hike up this particular valley is the ongoing installation of an overhead 11,000 volt electrical supply, heading somewhere up country. Every couple of 100 meters, a pylon has been installed ready to take the new cable. And at the site of each pylon, a scene of devastation, as trees have been felled and left laying where they landed. This seems nothing short of vandalism, with absolutely no effort made to remove fallen trees or use them for any other purpose. They're just left to lie and rot where they have fallen. The effects on wildlife along the route will have been enormous, and I fail to square this in my mind given the environmental conservation pillar of gross national happiness. Hydropower development in Bhutan has been the cornerstone of India-Bhutan cooperation, and the model consists of India supporting Bhutan in building hydropower projects by providing finance, a mix of grants, loans and technical support to design and construct the projects. Bhutan not only gets electricity for its own use, but also exports the surplus power to India, earning much needed revenue and foreign exchange, and giving India relatively cheap power. Hydropower exports contribute significantly to Bhutan's GDP. A recent influential report notes, however, that hydropower cooperation strategy is failing on a number of grounds, particularly with regard to its wide environmental impacts, as you can see here. As we continue on, the terrain starts to ease a little as we get closer to Jomulhari base camp. And here we are. Now we know we're here at 4,100 meters, so about 13,500 feet. Our overnight camp consists of two-man tents, Jerry and I in one, and as per usual, and the insomniac Lee having one to himself. We also have a dining tent and a kitchen tent where magic is performed by our cook, WD-40. Each evening we have a 3-course meal, starting with lashings of hot soup, plenty of seconds, a main course consisting of meat, usually chicken or roast beef, roast potatoes, and at least 4 vegetables, and including the Bhutan national dish of chili cheese, or emadachi. This consists of the hottest green chilies covered in melted yak's cheese, designed to blow your brains out, or mine at least. And whilst my 2 colleagues lap it up and perspire heavily, I have great respect for my stomach, and so I pass on this little delicacy. Now at Jomulhari Base Camp, I'm not feeling 100%, and I decide on a day of rest. So Lee and Jerry and Kensho leave me after breakfast, and I spend the day in this spectacular mountain amphitheatre, listening to music, reading, and considering the meaning of life. I'm reading one of the better sporting autobiographies I have read, The Battle by Paul O'Connell, Lions, Ireland and Munster Rugby Union captain. And if you want to know what motivates elite sportsmen and women, then look no further. I'm jolted from my reverie as a small black-clad group appear, passing through the campsite en route higher ground up the trail. I recognise the man at the front as the Foreign Minister of Bhutan. I know this because we'd seen the group the day before, and Kensho had pointed him out, and I'd snapped a cheeky photograph. That's him on the left, with the flat cap. I engage the minister in conversation and find out that he is out on the hustings, preparing for a district election shortly. He asks how I'm enjoying my time in Bhutan. I tell him very much indeed, but with one big reservation. The devastation caused by the electrical installation through the valley and beyond has upset me considerably. He agrees with me, but explains that the recipient of the electrical supply, the mountainous region of Linji, further up the valley, has had to make do with solar power for some time, and they need something more secure and resilient. He also explains that there is a tremendous health benefit, particularly for children, from a clean power supply, as it will remove the need of individual households to burn wood and kerosene to cook and keep warm, with all their associated smoke and fumes. On his return, I ask Kensho the name of the foreign minister, and he tells me it's Damsho Dorji. On my return to the UK, I Google Damsho Dorji, and I find his Facebook page. It's definitely him. I like his page, and I send him a private message saying how good it was to meet him, how much I enjoyed my time in Bhutan, and how we'd discussed the electrical installation and the devastation of the forest it was causing. Amazingly, within an hour, I get a reply. He's pleasantly surprised I've found and contacted him, and he explains how, on his return to Thimpu, he mentioned our conversation to the Prime Minister and discussed the electrical installation, recognising, in good political terms, that something needs to be done. I am just delighted that I now have such influence on happiness in Bhutan. Jitu Draki, at nearly 23,000 feet, this spectacular mountain is located directly east of Jomulhari and sits on Bhutan's border with Tibet. It has a most distinctive pyramid-shaped peak composed of razor-sharp ridges and is said to represent the protective deity of Paro. It has seen little expeditionary activity, even whilst climbing was allowed for the short period between 1983 and 1996. But since 1996, no technical climbing has been permitted anywhere in Bhutan. Agriculture alert. In such a mountainous country, there are many areas too steep for arable farming, but the land can be grazed. The majority of the grazing animals are cattle, with some yaks, goats and sheep. Around typical farmsteads like this, there will also be pigs and poultry. We are fortunate to witness a large herd of wild baral, or blue sheep, on the Jitu Drake slopes. Taxonomically, baral are somewhere between goats and sheep, and they turn a blue-grey in winter. They're usually found at altitudes anywhere between 5,000 and 15,000 feet. The baral herds are generally active throughout the day and alternate between feeding and resting on the grassy mountain slopes. If threatened, they freeze and attempt to camouflage themselves against the background. During times of scarcity of grass, they switch to herbs and shrubs and share a high degree of diet overlap with livestock, especially donkeys. Where they do overlap, they are the favoured prey of snow leopards, also with a few lambs falling prey to foxes or eagles. After this final day hike from base camp, and on our return to our campsite, we witness a massive avalanche on Jomulhari. It's too far away to cause us any concern, but for the yaks, it's a big deal, and a whole herd decides to head for lower pastures, rampaging through our campsite. On our return to base camp, we make a sighting of a fairly common member of the partridge pheasant family found all over the eastern Himalayas, namely the blood pheasant. One final night under canvas and our last tasty breakfast served up by Master Chef WD-40, second from the right. We say our farewells to all the team that have looked after us so well, all bar Kensho, who was our guide for the duration. Trek is now complete and we drive to Thimpu, the capital of Bhutan, with guide Kensho. It's a day of sightseeing. The two main attractions in Thimpu being the National Memorial Chorten and the giant Buddha Dordenma. We visit the Memorial Chorten early in the day, and young and old alike have arrived to do their daily devotions, as all good Bhutanese people do. Prayers are chanted as the devotees circle the Chorten multiple times, always in a clockwise fashion. It's a very peaceful start to our day, and we're permitted to witness Kensho as he lights several butter lamps and says his daily prayers. The Memorial Chorten was built by Queen Phuntsho Choden Wangchuk in memory of her son, the third Dragon King, who lived just 44 years. Our visit to the giant Buddha Dordenma coincides with a large festival of reaffirmation overseen by the head monk of Bhutan. And so we spend some time sitting and reflecting along with several hundred other people while the monks hand out rice. The massive statue is over 50 meters tall, making it one of the largest statues of Buddha anywhere in the world. It is made of bronze and gilded in gold and has 125,000 smaller Buddha statues placed inside, each similarly cast in bronze and gilded in gold. The throne on which the Buddha sits is a large meditation hall. The Buddha Dordenma is located atop a hill and overlooks the southern entrance to Thimpu Valley. The statue fulfills an ancient prophecy dating back to the 8th century and is said to emanate an aura of peace and happiness to the entire world. There's certainly no doubt you can see it from a long way off. From our location atop the hill on which the Buddha stands, we can see the whole of Thimpu sitting in the valley below us, a fine sight, and by my reckoning, not much bigger than Stamford. One major difference being the complete lack of traffic lights. Apparently they tried traffic lights for the whole of one day before deciding that traffic cops were more efficient and that it would take far too long to educate drivers the subtlety of red, amber and green. Instead, in downtown Thimpu, they have traffic cops with a difference. Posted inside ornate sentry boxes in the middle of main intersections in town, they perform with the grace and precision of ballet dancers, directing the traffic. Whether the traffic actually takes much notice of them is a moot point, but for the visitor with a camera, it certainly makes for something unique. An afternoon spent exploring Thimpu, and I think Lee went off to climb some hills, which doesn't take us too long, and tomorrow we will leave for Punakha, the old capital. It's a long and uncomfortable ride in the Toyota Hiace, and only part of the road is metalled, with most of it under development. The highlight of the journey, however, is Doshula Pass. At over 10,000 feet and with a clear blue sky, the panorama of the eastern end of the Himalayas at the top is stunning, and the monks we meet serene. We can see Jomulhari, Jitjudrake, as well as Gangapunsam at the far eastern end of the range. Gangapunsan is the tallest mountain in Bhutan at 24,500 feet and the tallest unclimbed mountain anywhere in the world. If you read Levison Wood's Walking in the Himalayas, you will know that Gangapunsan was his final objective before completing his mammoth walk. The other significant landmark atop Doshu La are the Druk Sang Chortens. These are red band or victory chortens totaling 108 in all, and were built under the patronage of Queen Wangmo Wangchuk. They were built as a memorial in honour of the Bhutanese soldiers who were killed in the December 2003 war against Assamese insurgents. They mark the victory of King Jigme Singhai Wangchuk, who dislodged the rebels from a total of 30 camps in Bhutanese territory, from where they were raiding Indian territory of Assam. The chortens were completed in mid-2004. The road descending from the pass continues to be under development most of the way to Punakha, and without beating about the bush, the whole project is a shambles. Undertaken by an Indian contractor, it's late and making the lives of villagers living along the road a complete misery. Mega dust, noise, and sections without any semblance of road slow our progress. But we eventually find our hotel for the night far up on a hillside overlooking the valley of Punakha. We awake as the sun starts to rise, burning off the mist in the valley below. As it does, the famous Punakha Zong comes into view, located along the junction of the Po and Mo rivers. Punakha Zong was built in 1693, and in 1907 was the site of the coronation of the first Dragon King. At that time, Punakha was the capital of Bhutan, and only 3 years later, a treaty was signed at Punakha with the British, who agreed not to interfere in Bhutanese affairs. The classic view of the Zong, the restoration completed in 2004, courtesy of the Indian government, and re-establishing the Zong to its former glory. Notable images, statues and thankas, or Tibetan silk paintings depicting Buddha, are displayed in the Zong, including murals depicting the life story of Buddha. Large gilded statues of Buddha and Guru Rinpoche belonging to the mid-18th century can also be found here. Whilst the internal design of the Zong is in the beautifully ornate wooden Bhutanese style. Something a little different in the afternoon as we visit the Chimilakang Monastery of Drukpa Kunli, a Tibetan Lama and a unique religious figure in Bhutan's history. He became known as the Divine Madman and was known for his unorthodox methods of enlightening other beings, mostly women, by having carnal relations with them. He demonstrated that celibacy was not necessary for being enlightened. Born in 1455, he lived to the ripe old age of 79, so he must have been doing something right. Drukpa Kunli is also credited with introducing the practice of phallus paintings on many buildings in Bhutan and placing statues of them on rooftops to drive away evil spirits. Because of this power to waken unenlightened beings, Kunli's reproductive appendage is referred to as the thunderbolt of flaming wisdom. What a legacy. And he himself is known as the fertility saint, with women from all around the world visiting his monastery to this day in search of fertility, or maybe just a blessing. Maybe that's just a euphemism, I'm not too sure. Our short time in Punakha comes to an end and we endure the 4 to 5 hour return journey to Paro. One final night before returning to Kathmandu, and I managed to take some night shots of the beautifully lit Paro fort, with the museum appearing to hang above it in the night sky. The following morning, we say farewell to our excellent guide and now friend Kencho. We wish him and his family well and hope he achieves his goal of becoming a lawyer. The takeoff out of Paro, this time on an Airbus jet, is sensational and as smooth as a flat white in your favourite coffee shop. The return journey to Kathmandu is just as stunning as the trip out, but this time as we come into land, we get a better view of the districts surrounding the capital of Nepal. I'd wanted to spend a couple of days back in Kathmandu, my fourth visit to this engaging but utterly chaotic city. I wanted to see what progress was being made after the tragic earthquake of April 2015. I'd done my little bit with my Lions Club, with the Rutland Lions Club, to help in a small way. And Lions clubs from all over the world had contributed to water sanitation equipment, so necessary in the days immediately after such a catastrophe. The city is recovering, but very slowly. Sadly, Durbar Square was typical, with much debris laying where it fell. Sorry, that was Durbar Square. And rebuilding work going on everywhere. However, Diwali was in full swing, but it will, however, take a long time for a poor country like Nepal to fully recover, if they ever do. My previous 3 trips to Nepal, including a trek to Everest Base Camp, well, they may make a good talk for a future evening, who knows. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I will unmute everybody now. Thank you very much indeed, Alan. That was a fantastic talk.
He was there 9 days.
Yeah, great,
Alan,
great information.
very good.
I've got several questions. If you can put the questions through on the chat facility.
Okay, I'll do my best.
The first one, earlier in the day, the surrounding countries, and I think he was particularly thinking about Chinese, but then I noticed that you had an Indian construction for the roadworks. Did you see much influence of the surrounding neighbours?
Well, there's no Chinese influence in Bhutan whatsoever, and the Indian influence that we saw will just have been associated with the predominantly the roadworks as it happens, although the electrical installation would obviously have had some Indian involvement, but that wasn't evident. What we did see were trains of horses carrying cable to higher ground. So virtually no Chinese influence, but some small amount of Indian influence.
Thank you. And the next one actually is right applicable to the picture you've got in front of you now, and it talked cleanliness and rubbish, and it was very clean, no rubbish, and very little people. But here, just across the border, you seem to have got a lot of people and probably quite a bit of rubbish as well. Have you got a comparison to make between Bhutan and Tibet? Or Nepal, rather.
Nepal. Well, in Kathmandu, particularly in the sort of more tourist area, this would be Tamil, which is, and particularly at that time of year, would be very, very busy. So yes, much less evidence of foreign tourists in Bhutan. I mean, we did see some, but very few in actual fact.
Yeah.
Whereas this time of year in Nepal, in Kathmandu, and particularly in Tamil, the world and their brother and sister come for the trekking predominantly.
And I think after about the 6th or 7th photograph of a bright blue sky, someone perked up and asked about the weather, and asking whether it was always like that, or whether there was a season in which you ought to be going to Bhutan.
Well, the Himalayas generally, you really want to be going in our autumn, October and November. And every day was a beautiful sunny day.
She did a good talk.
All right, I'm gonna I don't know who that is.
Pronunciation,
So yes, every day was a beautiful day. So Himalayas, if you can fairly well guarantee that sort of weather.
Sorry, Alan, you just go back a second because I muted everybody because there was noise in the background, and of course I muted you as well. So just pick that up a few seconds before. Yeah.
Yes, in terms of weather, if those that have been to Nepal and the Himalayas will know that if you want to go walking, then October, November is by far the best time. The monsoons have finished, the air is clear, the days are generally warm, although the nights are cold, and obviously the higher you go, the colder it gets. We were fairly close towards the end of the season in Bhutan, but and certainly it did get very cold at night.
Right, okay, and I've just got one about the currency, about the cost of living. Is it very high, or?
That's a good
Cost
question.
of a flat white. I think just like my father-in-law says, how much? What's the cost of a cup of coffee?
I think the cost of a flat white was 3.5 ngultrums. A ngultrum being the currency of Bhutan. Don't ask me to remember the exchange rate, please.
Was it a lot?
No, it was fine. It was probably equivalent to the cost over here in the UK. Certainly in the capital.
Right. Okay. Fine. What about did you find out where they didn't remove the felled trees and use them? Did you?
No, I'm waiting for the foreign minister to come back and answer that question. But so far, I've
Right.
not had a reply.
Yeah. And this is from Julie. Juliet Hargreaves says, "My question is, what of the whole trip was the most memorable and will stay with you forever?"
That's an interesting. Yeah, the bit I didn't talk about mainly. I mentioned that I wasn't particularly well, and so we did actually cut short our trek. And for those that don't know, about 3 or 4 weeks after I got home, I had a stroke. And I cannot forget that trip. I found out afterwards that the problems I'd had on that trip was AF, which led to a stroke about 3 or 4 weeks afterwards. So whatever happens, however much I enjoyed the trip, I'm afraid that's the thing that stays with me.
There is a couple of comments about the fallen trees again. Of course, the environmentalist lobby is there saying, and I agree with them, it's of great benefit for the insect life, etc., etc. So
to actually to leave them where they are.
Even they are, yes, that's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. That's why they don't clear them up on the golf course. Yeah, I think
perhaps I could direct message the foreign minister again, and maybe I can find a bit more. Yeah. And if I do, I'll get back to everybody.
And I think I'll end on this final one from Lee, who says, "What does Bhutan have to teach the rest of the world?"
Well, Lee should know.
They're not as advanced as us.
he was there with me.
Ah, right. Yeah. So he could answer it himself then.
He could do, yeah.
Well, say as well.
I think there are a couple more, but I think time's running out, and I was keen to stop this after about 50 minutes. So I think I'll thank you, Allan, very much indeed for an excellent talk, and close just one. Sorry, just one. There was one other message coming through. I see it was going to be a good question, but it was just thanking you again, Allan, for such a superb presentation.
Well,
thank you very much.
The lovely thing is to be able to relive such fantastic memories. So thank you for the opportunity.
Okay then, well, the chat facility will remain open for a few minutes at any rate. So if anyone's got anything else to add, please do so. But the formalities of the occasion, we'll call that a day. And thank you very much indeed, all of you, for listening.
Thank you.